Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, possibly the greatest love letter to books and bibliophiles ever penned. So, you may be familiar with this work or may perhaps even have read it yourself. It is a pretty popular work and also a pretty highly renowned one, and that's really a feat given the genre to which this book belongs and the era in which it was penned. But on the off chance that you're not familiar with this book, I will, for the sake of thoroughness, give an overview of what it is and what it's about. So, Fahrenheit 451 is a work of dystopian science fiction which was penned in the 1950s, I believe. Like I say, it's really a true accomplishment that this book received the level of acclaim that it did, given that science fiction at that time really was not the most highly regarded of genres. It really wasn't until the 60s and then the 70s with like the new wave of science fiction that sci-fi really started to be taken serious, like critically. But Fahrenheit 451 is kind of an anomaly. It's a real exception to that rule. Came out of like the golden age of sci-fi when the genre was mainly kind of devoted to pulp stories and not generally what you might consider like highbrow literature. But like I say, Fahrenheit 451 stands as a very acclaimed work. In fact, it's I think it may be ranked by some people at least as like one of the best books of the 20th century. But like I say, it is a work of dystopian science fiction which depicts a future in which books are largely outlawed and in which the government employs individuals known as firemen to incinerate books. That's right. It's kind of a reverse of the common conception of a fireman as someone who puts out fires. The firemen in the world of Fahrenheit 451 start fires, and they start fires in particular to burn books, which, like I say, have been largely outlawed in this future. And the story of Fahrenheit 451 follows one such fireman named Guy Montag, who, after encountering a kind of manic pixie dream girl who is his neighbor, he is kind of awakened to the fact that his life is a hollow, depressing charade, and that he really has nothing to live for, and his world is kind of shitty. So after awakening to that, he begins to question his role as a fireman, as a destroyer of books, and ultimately absconds with some and starts to read. But this draws down the ire of his boss, and he eventually gets in contact with an old professor from the pre-book ban world, and they kind of formulate a scheme to perpetuate the literary legacy. But then Montag's wife turns him in because he has books, and that's outlawed, like I say. And so then he ends up having to destroy his own house, but then he gets pushed too far and smokes his own boss, immolates his own superior, then goes on the run. And then there's a war in the background, a kind of unspecified war. And then the city in which Montag lately lived is ultimately destroyed, but he ends up hooking up with some fellow literati, and they mosey on down the line to try to keep literature going. And that's basically the overview of Fahrenheit 451. And Fahrenheit 451 is not a long book. This edition right here, the 60th anniversary edition, a lot of this book is commentary. Like the actual book ends right here. The rest of this is just commentary. In fact, I don't even know like if this is truly a full-length novel. I guess it is, but if it is, it just barely gets it over the line into that full-length territory, because it is a very brief book. And that's kind of the main criticism that I might have to offer of it. But anyway, since I've summarized the plot of Fahrenheit 451, let's talk about the particulars of it and its technical qualities. So the writing in Fahrenheit 451 is really good, and that is probably a major factor in why it kind of escaped the curse of science fiction that was kind of prevalent to that genre once again in that era where science fiction was largely kind of for the pulps and didn't really produce any like Nobel winning or even Pulitzer winning works because it was kind of relegated to the critical fringe, you might say. But I think the quality of the prose in Fahrenheit 451 really does go a long way to explaining why it is such an acclaimed work because Ray Bradbury was a really gifted writer. He was, and there are some truly poetic passages in Fahrenheit 451. And like I say, it's that probably goes a long way to explaining the acclaim that it received. But I don't really have much to complain about in terms of the writing of Fahrenheit 451. At times, it can kind of like there are a couple of points where it maybe goes overboard just a little bit, and it's kind of purpley, just a teensy bit perhaps. But by and large, it's a remarkably well written book. And yeah, so I don't have much to complain about with that. Now, as to the characters, it's really just Montag. He's the main character, and the secondary characters do have some kind of depth to a degree, but it's mainly focused on Montag. And where it focuses primarily, it primarily succeeds. Montag is a pretty good character. This is, I guess, what you might say, something of a character study, almost like a Bildungsroman of a sort of a man who has lived much of his life with a certain mentality, doing things, committing deeds which he did not question for the longest time, but who now has woken up to the fact that his life sucks and the world in which he lives also sucks and tries to set about doing something about that. And it's pretty powerful. There is some really like intense emotion at times in this book, and that's something that hit me more now than it did when I read this book the first time, because this is not the first time I've read Fahrenheit 451. This is either the second or the third time that I have read the book. I read it first years ago, and I want to say I may have read it another time between then and now. But either way, this is at least my second time reading it. And reading it this time, I really was struck by just how like poignant it can get at times, especially in those kind of those more intense, more psychologically intense moments where it's not we're not having the flamethrowers, you know, throwing flames and the book burnings and everything. It's not. That may be what a lot of people think of first when they think of Fahrenheit 451 is the firemen burning the books and, you know, flames and fire everywhere and destruction, right? And kind of action perhaps. But there are more quieter moments in the book, which the more reflective moments, if you will, and those really cut to the quick. They do. There are instances in the book which really struck me pretty forcefully this time around reading it, where Montag is reflecting, like I say, on the quality of his life and the way that the people around him live their lives and the way that they're just kind of mindless, unthinking drones. And it's kind of a lament because he is recognizing the fact that these people aren't like fully developed people. Their lives are like imitations of life. They're missing something. They're kind of soulless, like spiritually dead people that can't really connect to each other because that aspect of their persona has been essentially just killed. And that's really where the book truly shines, is in some of the quieter, more reflective moments where Montag is reflecting on how wrong this world is and the wrongs that he has been a part of and has perpetrated up to now. Really powerful stuff, honestly. Like I say, the secondary characters do have some depth. There is the character of Beatty, who is Montag's fire chief, his boss. And he has some depth, I think, because you get the impression of a guy who has kind of sold out. Like, he is on the side of the system, of the government. He wants to see the books destroyed, but he also knows what they're doing. Like, a lot of the other characters such as Mildred, which is Montag's wife, they don't really have any kind of conception of books and literature and like the life of the mind, if you will. But Beatty, the fire captain, he really does, and so you get the impression of this kind of conflicted character who is wholeheartedly participating in the destruction of books, of literature, but also is fully aware of what they're losing and may just kind of harbor a kernel of regret somewhere down in there. You kind of get that vibe. So the characters, where it counts, get the job done. It is, again, something of a character study, and I think it's pretty effective. Now, as to the story of the book, like I say, my main criticism of Fahrenheit 451 would be its brevity, because this is a blisteringly fast-paced book, and it's a little bit too fast-paced. It feels like it's kind of fast tracking some things that may have needed to have been drawn out just a little bit longer. Ray Bradbury did not, by and large, write like overly long books. Like a lot of what his reputation rests upon are short stories like The Martian Chronicles, and also stories like A Sound of Thunder. A lot of his body of work is composed of shorter fiction. And in fact, I believe Fahrenheit 451 is actually an expansion of a pre-existing short story of his. So he was not really writing bricks like War and Peace. He was much more geared towards shorter format works. But nonetheless, I do think that Fahrenheit 451 could have been improved a little bit by a little bit more length, because it feels at times like we're just kind of going through the motions, like we're hitting the beats a little bit too perfectly. Because again, the story is the story of Montag's character transformation from an unthinking fireman who doesn't question his duty and destroys very valuable things, to the anti-establishment rebel who is now hell-bent on righting his wrongs, so to speak. But again, it does feel at times like it's just kind of going point by point a little bit too perfectly. Like we have Montag meet like literally just like on, within the first few pages, Montag meets the little neighbor girl. I say little, she's like a teenager, I think, named Clarice. She's like the total manic pixie dream girl, right? She's kind of a dreamer, head in the clouds kind of, but like that's what sets her apart so much from the rest of the world, because her personality is so much more curious and thoughtful, in contrast to just the dead mindlessness of the other characters of this world. And she is what kind of awakens Montag to the shittiness of his life. And then she dies like pretty quickly right after that, and then that kind of plunges Montag to the nadir of his character arc, his lowest point, and again, some of these things just happen a little bit too perfectly. It's just a little bit too point by point. It could have been longer, I think, and it really could have been longer because there's not much description given to the world, like in a physical sense. The entire story of Fahrenheit 451, to me anyway, kind of took place in this nebulous blur where physical things aren't that well defined or specified, and there's not that much detail in terms of like the environment. Like socially, we get it. The books were outlawed, and society has been remarkably dumbed down. But in a very concrete, like physical sense, there's not much in the way of description here. And I think it could have been improved a little bit in that regard as well. But now let's talk about like what Fahrenheit 451 is about, because that is kind of a hotly contested point, because a lot of people have thought historically that Fahrenheit 451 is like about book burning. It's kind of a reaction to like at the time, recent events in Germany with the Nazis and the book burnings and everything, and that it was warning about the destruction of information and the destruction of the mind, and the destruction of the mind's life and everything. And that's what most people seem to have thought for the longest time that it's about. Bradbury himself, I think, actually changed what he said the book was initially inspired by over the years. But one of the explanations that he gave, I believe, of it is that it was kind of a reaction to the advent of television, because it was written in the 1950s when television was really just getting going, and it was becoming more ubiquitous. And Fahrenheit 451 is a meditation on the deleterious effects of technological advancement on human character. And this is also a theme which you can find if you've read Bradbury's other book entitled Dandelion Wine. There's also a little bit of that touched upon in there, that as technology advances and as people don't have to perform the same tasks that they used to, they don't have to devote as much time to things to accomplish, something is lost in our character that way. Something fundamental, something basic is dissipated. And so we advance in one way, but in another way we kind of regress. And I think that is really probably the best analysis of Fahrenheit 451. That's what I take from it anyway, because that seems to be, to me, again, what the book is mostly commenting on, because the regime of the dystopia that is the world of the book is not really well specified, and it's kind of implied, or just stated perhaps, that the books became banned because people didn't really want them anymore. You know, that's kind of the distinction that people make between like 1984 and Brave New World, right? Like Orwell envisioned a future in which books were burned, whereas Huxley envisioned a future where books didn't have to be burned because nobody read them to begin with. And that's kind of, I think, what Fahrenheit 451 is leaning more towards. It's a meditation on the willing abnegation by people of mediums of information in favor of more immediate gratification, that books are just kind of abandoned in favor of radio and television and cinema and such, because it requires much less work, and it also weakens human character because of that. That's what I took from it. I think it definitely does show its age in a way, because that was, again, television was just coming into its own in the 1950s, and I think you can see that, or at least that's what I mostly see in the book. And also, it's definitely a product of the 1950s, because the world which the book envisions is like extrapolated from the trends of the 1950s. Like juvenile delinquency is a major issue in the book, of those rotten, crazy kids out in their automobiles racing up and down the highways at extreme speeds, like something out of like Rebel Without a Cause, right? And also there's a point like Montag and his wife, it appears that they sleep in like separate beds, like twin beds, like the I Love Lucy twin beds, right? Where even in books, apparently it was kind of taboo to depict men and women sleeping in the same bed. It feels very 1950-ish, and that's why this book is kind of it's definitely a product of like the golden age of science fiction, which was like the 40s and 50s, but it has exceeded the bounds that the vast majority of works written in that genre in that time period were restricted to, and it has broken free, and it has become a very highly acclaimed book, and a very popular book, and one that I think is still quite important, because whether you view this book as a reaction to like Nazi book burnings, or as I do, more about like television and immediate gratification in lieu of more reflective modes of entertainment and information transfer. I think that this book still has a lot to say, because we live in an age now where like television is the least of our worries now. Like TikTok is straight up killing the attention spans of children. Like you've got kids out there that can't focus on anything that lasts more than like 30 seconds now. And also video games and stuff like that. I mean, we're going down some bad paths in terms of what we're doing to our young people in our world today. And I think that Fahrenheit 451 kind of got the jump on that. It kind of previsioned some things. And because of that, I think it's still relevant. Like I say, even though it's very 1950s, it feels very Jetsons kind of in a way. It feels like it's something you might see on like the Jetsons in a way. Nevertheless, it still has some things to say, and it probably always will have some things to say. And because of that, I think it's still a valuable work. It's probably one of the most acclaimed science fiction novels of the last century, and possibly as well one of the most acclaimed dystopian novels of the last century, also. Uh, and because of that, I could rate it quite highly. So, to rate the book, to rate Fahrenheit 451, I'm going to give the book an A minus. I do think there are some aspects to it that could have been done better. In particular, it could have been fleshed out a little bit more in some key areas, but those are by and large minor criticisms. And this book is a quite powerful and really a quite valuable work, and I think it holds up more or less quite well. So yes, from me, Fahrenheit 451 is going to get an A minus. Now, have you read Fahrenheit 451? Be sure to let me know down in the comments if you have, what you thought about it and whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, definitely do give it a read. Like this is like necessary reading, not only because it's like a quintessential work of science fiction and dystopia, but also because uh, our world, the problems that the book was kind of grappling with in terms of like technology and what it does to our character as humans, have been exacerbated greatly since the publication. So I think that its message, or its potential message at least, is still a vital one. So I would definitely recommend picking this up because I think it has some good points that it makes and some good things that it says that are well worth hearing. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.